We were working pretty well as a team, and I'm going to sound a little bit odd here, but what motivates you as a soldier? It's not Queen and country. It certainly wasn't the higher ideals of the United Nations. But when you're in a scary or difficult situation with people, what Oscar Wilde calls intimacy of shared experience, and this certainly applies for soldiers, and I'd suggest it probably applies to most people in the busy world outside the military as well, then you get close to those people. And when you get close to those people, you don't want to let them down. And this is what happened to us. We had a common aim, a common goal, and we also had a common foe. And this meant that we bonded very effectively, and there was no way we were going to let each other down. And also there was the fact that we felt we were making a difference. I've always been an adrenaline junkie, but trust me, there's no high to be had like the feeling that in some small way you're making a difference, especially if you're working for an organisation that you care about and whose ideals you believe in. And this was very important for us. But things perhaps inevitably weren't quite that simple. We wandered around with missionary zeal, having kids point guns in our faces, but we weren't doing it alone. We were protected at times by a battalion, which means about 500 armed Kenyan soldiers. Now, they were armed in order not only to protect the logistics bases and our houses and stuff where we lived, but also to protect the disarmament centres if and when any of these kids, any of the child soldiers chose to disarm. If there was no way of protecting ex-combatants from the local population, then as soon as they handed their guns in, then the local villagers would just come and carry out some act of revenge or retribution, and we had to do something to protect them. Now, it's no coincidence that the Kenyans had been given the hardest area to protect in Sierra Leone, and if it weren't for their professionalism, discipline and bravery, I would not be standing here today talking to you. They were all good guys. So we were doing pretty well. Thousands of kids had disarmed, and we're thinking we're going to do all right. But perhaps, with retrospect, we were living on borrowed time. As although the junior rebels were quite into the peace process, if nothing else because we were going to give them money every time they handed in a gun, money which came from the World Bank, and if the 1,000 guns that were handed in to us, every time a gun was handed in, I'd take the rifle and I'd bend the barrel of the gun between two branches of a tree, take out a sledgehammer and destroy the trigger mechanism, knowing that whatever else happened, that gun was not going to be used again. And to my way of thinking, $200 from the World Bank seemed pretty good value for money for taking those guns off the streets. But the senior rebels, they liked the peace process as well because they were now members of the government. But it was the middle-ranking warlords on the ground, the guys who enjoyed the power of life and death in the areas they controlled and generally who would take the prettiest local girls as their bushwives. These were the guys who had a real issue with what we were doing. If they were unarmed, uneducated ex-rebels with loads of enemies, then life was not going to be good for them. And sadly, on the 1st of May 2000, the rebels turned on the United Nations. I happened to be on my lunch break from one of the disarmament centres. So as I sat there 5 miles away from the disarmament centre, I heard the noise of gunfire in the distance. And as I was eating my pasta for lunch, little did I know that the afternoon shift was being taken prisoner. We heard some gunfire, and then we received some garbled instructions, first of all in Swahili on the radio, then in English, for us to go and investigate to see what was happening. And I was to have a couple of bits of really good luck this particular day. I jumped in a jeep with one of my UN colleagues, a Gambian officer called Joe, and we drove out through the gates of our compound. And as we drove out through the gates, somebody shouted that I was wanted in the operations room on the satellite phone. So I jumped out of the jeep, and my place was taken by Knut Jellestad, a Norwegian officer. We didn't see Knut or Joe again. We did hear what was happening, though, as Knut had managed to hide a walkie-talkie in his rucksack, and he'd managed to press the transmit button. And we listened to the noise of Knut and Joe being dragged out of their vehicles, stripped of their uniforms, tied up with wire, and then badly beaten. And then there was a single gunshot. We assumed the worst. In fact, it was the rebels playing mind games with us. They'd found the radio, and they'd shot the radio. Both men were to survive after 3 weeks of hell in the hands of the rebels, but life was looking pretty grim. Out of our team of 14, 4 were on duties in different parts of the country, 2 had been killed in the day's attack, and 2 had been taken hostage. I found myself inadvertently not really looking for the position of being the new guy in charge. Our boss was gone, and although I was the youngest guy in the team, I felt that my best means of self-preservation and the best way of me not going mad, to be honest, was to keep myself busy. And as soon as I found myself perhaps being marginally less frightened than some of the other guys who were there, even though they were older and perhaps had been shot at more often than I had, I found that that gave me some sort of strength. And I don't know what you guys find, but when things are going wrong, sometimes it's best to be the person in charge. And if not, then it's best to keep yourself busy, as otherwise you'll go mad. But 2 days stuck in our house with a large lynch mob outside, and then finally our next door neighbours, the same people as who'd come to us telling us when we'd fallen out over the monkey incident, they came to us and told us that one of the local hard nuts was on his way to do us in. And I remember thinking, well, we can't fight our way out of here. We're not going to be able to negotiate our way out of here, but we might be able to trick our way out of here. And I remembered a story that a Canadian park ranger had once told me about what to do if you're attacked by a grizzly bear. And he simply said, when the bear attacks, take your rucksack off and lay it on the ground in front of you. And the bear will be more interested in the contents of your rucksack than he will be in you. I thought, well, not a lot of grizzly bears in Sierra Leone, but maybe the same principle will apply. So what we did was to put some of our expensive, shiny-looking equipment out by the front door. The fridge, the TV, the video. Even put one of the Jeeps out by the front gate with the keys in the ignition and the engine still running, hoping and praying that when we legged it out the back door, people would go for our equipment, and not ourselves.